All right guys, today on Grow the Earth, we're gonna go over tomatoes. And I'm gonna go through the different types and how that's gonna vary as how you plant and how you stake and how you care for these tomatoes. Here in my left hand, I've got a sweetie, which is an indeterminate variety. And later on in the video, I'll explain what indeterminate means. And in my right hand, I have a Roma, which is a determinate variety. And both of these are going to be planted in about the same way, but the staking method, the method they grow, and how they set fruit are completely and entirely different. So that is the first determination we need to make when we're planting our tomatoes, is what type of tomato do I have? Like I said, we've got an indeterminate and we've got a determinate variety. And well, let's start with the indeterminate variety. All right, our indeterminate variety is a sweetie. And what the indeterminate means is there is not a determined height for this plant. When you plant this thing in the ground, it is going to continue to grow the full season until either you pull it out or the cold makes it intolerable for it to continue to thrive. With the single stem method that we have, that we use here in the garden, these will get upwards of 7 to 8 foot tall. And I'll go over what single stemming means and what we're going to, how you can do this method and how you can get your tomato plants to be that tall and that fruitful. But also, with this sweetie, it puts on clumps or clusters of tomatoes. So it grows a little bit different than what a regular tomato would be. But here behind me, you see I've got some stakes in the ground already. And I'm going to bring you in a little bit closer and I'm going to show you what single stemming means and what we're going to do to get the fullest potential out of these indeterminate tomatoes. All right guys, so this is how we're going to plant our indeterminates. Guys, what we have here is a 1/2 inch by 1.5 inch by 8 foot long furring strip. And what we're going to do is we're going to use these to single stem our indeterminate tomatoes. So for what we're going to do first is we're going to go ahead and dig a hole, and I've already placed these stakes here so that I know exactly where they're going to go, because you want to dig these down relatively close to your stake. You want to dig your hole down relatively close to the stake, that way that it's easier to tie it up as it grows. So what we're going to do is we're going to dig down a few inches here, and we're going to take our microlife fertilizer. We're going to put a little bit down in the bottom of the hole here and kind of mix that in with our soil that's down there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our plant out, and I don't know if you guys can see that, but this plant was very happy, and it's going to be even happier to get out of this little pot here. This is a 3 3/4 by 3 3/4 by 3 3/4 pot here, and it is almost root bound. But what we're going to do is we're going to take off these bottom leaves here, because a tomato will root all along its stem. So what we can do is we can actually take these and we can plant these further down to give it more root surface. So what we're going to do is we're going to put that down in the hole here. We're going to get it right up next to that stake, and then we're going to backfill the hole here. Now, the one thing that a lot of people don't do, which you definitely need to do, is to give these a little pat, to kind of push this soil down after you have planted it, because if you do not, if you remember back to my seeding video where I was planting these in the little pots, any kind of air will damage them. Well, you have the same thing when you plant here. You don't want any air pockets in there because it'll cause you issues with your plant. So now that we've got that planted, we've got it right up next to our stake. So now as this plant grows up, we're going to tie it off to here. And that way it'll give it support, and it doesn't have to worry about necessarily having a good strong stem, because this stake is going to provide everything it needs as far as support for it. And like I said, this will allow this plant here to get a good 7-8 foot tall. And even then, once it gets that tall, we can top it and it'll continue to grow outward. So that's our indeterminate. And in a moment here, I'll show you about how we're going to plant our determinate tomatoes to give them the help and support they need. All right, guys, and we're going to talk about single stemming and what it means. Single stemming is what we do for indeterminate tomatoes, and what that means is we're going to only keep the main stem. Whenever you have a tomato, especially an indeterminate, what you have is what they call suckers. And what a sucker is whenever you have your main stem, which is right here, and you have your leaf, in that crook you'll actually have another leaf node try and come out. But what that actually is that is a whole nother plant that is trying to grow out of that little crook. And what will end up happening is everything above that will suffer, because now that tomato plant is trying to grow this new tree, this new tomato plant out of the side of its main trunk. So with single stemming, you keep your main stem, but you pull off all of those suckers and you tie it about every 6 inches as it grows. And what that does is that contains your tomato to a more of a confined space. It doesn't get as bushy, but you still get all of the fruit that you normally would, and usually in a larger quantity, a larger size, because where that sucker would pull off, it starts flowering and it starts putting on fruit, and you don't have that extra. Now, in contrast with a determinate tomato, you just let it grow. You don't pull suckers off it because you want it to flourish to its full potential. And they usually tend to grow more of a bush, whereas with an indeterminate that you single stem, you get more of like a tree, basically, because it's going to grow straight up and you're going to have just leaves and fruit. Whereas your determinate tomato is going to be more of a bush, so all those suckers that you would pull off of an indeterminate, you're not going to pull off of a determinate tomato. So that is the reason I single stem, because I can actually put more tomatoes within a smaller area because they don't take up as much space. With determinates, which we have a few, we usually set those more on an end because they usually turn into a bush and they take quite a bit of space. All right, guys, now we have our determinate tomatoes. And this particular one is a Roma. And we're going to stake this entirely different, because this plant is not going to get any more than maybe 4.5 foot tall. And then that's pretty much it. So we don't need our 8-foot furring strip. I've got a 4-foot little plastic stake that you can pick up at your local big box store. But we're gonna tie off to it to help give the plant some support. So if we get an errant strong wind, it's not going to damage it. So we're going to start off the same way. Is we're going to put our stake in first. We're going to dig a hole right up next to our stake. We're going to dig that down. And even though this is a determinate tomato, it still has the same properties, as in that it will root all along its stem. But we're going to take off the leaves about 2 inches up. We're going to take our plant out. Oh, well, almost forgot. We're going to put a little bit of the microlife fertilizer in the bottom of that hole and kind of mix it into our soil there. And then we're going to take our plant out. And wow, guys, this is the same way. This is almost root bound. Now mind you, these tomatoes were only planted about 6 weeks ago. A little bit, maybe 7 weeks ago. And they're almost to the point of being root bound. This is what you get when you have good grow lights. This plant achieved its fullest potential in that little 3 3/4 by 3 3/4 pot. So much so that it was almost to the point of hurting itself because of it didn't have anywhere for its roots to go anymore. So good grow lights make for good root production. So you guys who are using those little bitty LED strings and think just because there's light shining on there that it's helping, you need a good full spectrum grow light, and it does this for you. So we're going to put this down in here. And like I said, we're going to plant it deeper than what we initially had our soil level at, because this thing will root all along it. And we're going to pat that down. And that way, as this thing grows up, and it'll get, you know, about 4 foot tall, but still we can tie off to this, and this will give it some extra support. So that's our determinants. And pretty much all your determinants and all your indeterminates can be done these same methods. This tomato, because it's a determinate, it's going to grow, it's going to put on all the fruit that it's going to put on, and then it's going to be full of fruit, and that's it. Once it has accomplished that, it's done for. It won't continue to grow, and it won't continue to fruit anymore. It's going to put on as much fruit as it wants to at one point, and then it's done. So especially with determinants, you don't get a second chance at fertilizing or making sure that the ground is in the greatest condition, because by the time that you realize that this thing needs some more fertilizer, or that your pH is off, or whatever it may be, your plant has already grown and is probably set in the fact of it's only going to get 2 foot tall if it's missing a lot of nutrients. All right, guys, so now we're going to transition over to, if you remember, when I did the video on our greenhouse, we had multiple plants in one pot. And with the help of my wife, we're going to show you how you can separate these and save both plants. You don't have to clip off and sacrifice one of those plants. You can save both plants and plant them out. All right, guys, so here is 2 tomato plants. I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see that are actually very, very close together. And what we're going to do is we're going to loosen up all the soil to make it easy for them to come out. Grab hold of both of the tomato plants and pull it out. And as you can see, we're going to see the same thing we saw in our other ones, that there is a lot of roots there on those guys. So you do have to have delicate hands. You do have to take it easy, but you just start to work them apart. And you can see it's going to take a little bit of time, but you get a 2-for-1 tomato plant. So you don't have to plant each one out individually. So these two, I mean, this is really an exception, because these sprung up really close together. So we're just working in a way, trying to move the roots out of the way to where we can kind of separate them real easy. And eventually you're going to see that when she starts getting to where she gets 2 different root balls to a point, she's actually going to start trying to almost twist them, to give them a little bit of a twist to where they'll work themselves apart. And obviously my wife is shaking her head because these are being a little bit more difficult than usual. But, and like I said, this is an exception. These are extremely close together. Usually they're on opposite ends of the planter, the little pot there, so it makes it a little bit easier for them to get apart. But I know that she's determined, and she'll make sure they come apart, because she really, really hates cutting tomatoes off. So now you see here she's working from the top. She's just about got them apart. And you know, our main focus here is to not break as many roots as we can. Invariably it's going to happen, but we're gonna try and do as few as possible. And now you see that they're just about apart. Like I said, it takes some time and some effort, but you're rewarded with two different plants. And again, we haven't wasted any of God's gift here. You know, He did the gift of giving us these two plants, and now we're going to reap the reward and honor Him by placing both of these in the ground to where they can make us food. All right, guys, so we're going to finish planting the rest of our tomatoes off camera here. I just wanted to go over real quick like I said, the different types and how we plant them different because they grow different. And you know, guys, each one of these plants, and this is why I showed you my wife separating those tomato plants, because we believe that every one of those plants is a gift from God, and we want to make sure that we use God's gift to the fullest potential. So if He gives us two plants in a container, then we're going to separate those two plants out, and we're going to try and plant them and give them a chance to produce and do what God intended them to do. So, guys, as always, I'm going to tell you to pray over your family, pray over your garden, and have a great day.